welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales and boundless imagination come to life. Enjoy the story and don't forget to subscribe. The jarring crash tore Roy Clark from the precipice of unconsciousness. Alarms blared like banshees, their shrill cries echoing within the mangled confines of his escape pod. Smoke, thick and acrid, choked the air, stinging his eyes and rasping at his throat. With a guttural cough, Roy wrestled against the stubborn harness, his fingers fumbling with the release mechanism. Come on, he muttered, his voice strained with urgency. Finally, with a satisfying click, the straps loosened, and he shoved them aside. The hatch, however, remained stubbornly sealed. Panic clawed at the edges of his mind. Roy kicked at it, once, twice, adrenaline surging through his veins. On the third attempt, the weakened metal buckled and burst open with a screech, sending him sprawling onto the alien soil. He gasped, sucking in the humid air, his lungs burning with each ragged breath. Lush, purple vegetation surrounded him, a riot of alien flora unlike anything he had ever encountered in his simulations or briefings. Towering, bioluminescent plants cast an ethereal glow, illuminating the strange, vibrant landscape. Roy staggered to his feet, his head swimming, and leaned against the wreckage of his pod for support. A rustling sound pierced the relative quiet, making him freeze. His heart pounded in his chest. From the dense foliage emerged a figure that stole his breath away. She was tall, athletic, with skin the color of flawless sapphire. Her eyes, piercing and silver, seemed to bore into him. She moved with a fluid grace, holding a spear crafted from polished obsidian, its point aimed directly at his throat. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice a melodic alto, accented with a precision that suggested formal training in the English language. Roy raised his hands slowly, palms open in a gesture of peace. I come in peace," he offered, forcing a weak smile. The woman's eyes widened imperceptibly. "By the goddess," she breathed, her voice laced with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You're a man." Before Roy could respond, more figures materialized from the jungle shadows, their movements silent and swift. Blue-skinned women, all armed with spears and bows, surrounded him, their gazes wary and assessing. Each was strikingly beautiful, with curves that would make even the most celebrated supermodels weep with envy. The first woman, clearly their leader, circled him slowly, her silver eyes never leaving his. "I am Era, chief of the Azure tribe," she stated, her voice firm but controlled. "Who are you, and how did you come to our world?" Roy swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. "I'm Roy Clark, a pilot. My ship malfunctioned, and I crash-landed here. I mean you no harm." Era's spear lowered slightly, but her stance remained guarded. "A man," she repeated, a complex mixture of wonder and hunger battling in her expression. "Era," another woman hissed, stepping forward. "We believed your kind extinct. We should take him to the village. The elders must decide his fate." Era nodded, her expression tightening with resolve. "You will come with us," she told Roy, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Any resistance will be met with force." "Wouldn't dream of it," Roy muttered, eyeing the array of spears and bows pointed in his direction. As they marched him through the dense jungle, Roy's mind raced. The women's reaction to him was bizarre, as if they had never seen a man before. And their language, how did they know English? The entire situation defied logic and reason. The foliage parted abruptly, revealing a village of graceful structures that seemed to grow organically from the trees themselves. The buildings were crafted from a shimmering, opalescent material that blended seamlessly with the surrounding environment. Roy gaped at the seamless blend of nature and technology. Waterfalls cascaded down the sides of buildings, feeding into crystalline pools teeming with colorful, bioluminescent fish. Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd as they entered the village. Women of all ages stared at Roy with expressions ranging from fear to fascination. He caught snatches of whispered conversation, a real man. I thought they were myths. The prophecy. Era led him to a large, central building that resembled a giant, hollowed-out tree. Inside, a group of older women sat in a semicircle, their faces etched with wisdom and authority. One rose, her silver hair cascading down her back like a waterfall. I am Althena, head of the council, she said, her voice resonating with a quiet power. Era, explain this visitor. As Era recounted the circumstances of Roy's arrival, he studied the council members. Despite their apparent age, they retained the same otherworldly beauty as the younger women. Their eyes held a depth of knowledge and experience that both intrigued and intimidated him. Althena turned her gaze upon Roy, her silver eyes piercing and assessing. You claim to be human, a man. He nodded, a touch of defiance creeping into his voice. Last time I checked. Look, I'm just as confused as you are. Where exactly am I? Althena sighed, a hint of weariness in her voice. You are on Nova, home of the Azure. We have not seen a man in over 1,000 years. Roy blinked, struggling to process the information. I'm sorry, what? Althena sighed again. It is a long and painful history. Our ancestors were cursed. All men perished, while we women became almost immortal but unable to bear children. We have survived through cloning technology, but it grows less stable with each generation. Roy's head spun. That's a lot to take in, he managed. A younger council member leaned forward eagerly, her eyes sparkling with hope. But you could be the key to our salvation. If you can father children. NEA, Althena snapped, her voice sharp. We must not get ahead of ourselves. This man may be dangerous. I'm really not, Roy interjected, his hands raised in a placating gesture. I'm just a pilot who had some terrible luck, or maybe great luck, depending on how this goes, he added, unable to help himself as he glanced around at the stunning women. Era, standing guard nearby, narrowed her eyes but couldn't quite hide a smirk. Althena frowned, her gaze hardening. We must discuss this in private. Era, take him to the guest quarters and post a guard. We will reconvene at dawn. As Era led him out of the council chamber, the whispers and stares from the villagers intensified. Roy caught sight of himself in a polished surface, stubbled, disheveled, and very much the alien here. The guest quarters turned out to be a cozy, treehouse-like structure, nestled high among the branches of a giant, flowering tree. As Era showed him inside, Roy couldn't help but notice how close she stood, her eyes roving over him with undisguised curiosity. So, he said, aiming for casual, 1,000 years without men, huh? That's rough. Era's lips twitched, a hint of amusement in her eyes. We have managed. But I admit, your presence is intriguing. Just intriguing? Roy raised an eyebrow, a playful glint in his eyes. She stepped closer, her voice lowering to a husky whisper. Perhaps more than intriguing. But you are still an unknown quantity, Roy Clark. Do not mistake curiosity for trust. With that, she turned to leave. At the doorway, she paused, her back to him. I will be guarding you personally tonight. Do not attempt to leave. As the door closed behind her, Roy collapsed onto the bed with a groan. What have I gotten myself into? He muttered to the empty room. Hours passed. Roy tossed and turned, his mind racing. The events of the day played on repeat, the crash, the alien women, the revelations about their past. And underlying it all, a current of tension he couldn't ignore. He was a prisoner, yes, but also something more, a potential savior, a curiosity, a threat. A soft sound at the door made him sit up, his senses on high alert. Era slipped inside, her eyes gleaming in the dim light filtering through the bioluminescent leaves outside. I thought you were guarding me, Roy said, his mouth suddenly dry. I am, she replied, moving closer, her movements fluid and graceful. Very closely. Roy's heart hammered against his ribs. Won't you get in trouble? Era's smile was predatory, a flash of teeth in the dim light. I make the rules, Roy Clark. And right now, I'm making an exception. She reached for him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Roy's last coherent thought was that he was either the luckiest or the unluckiest man in the galaxy. Roy's breath caught as Era closed the distance, her fingers brushed his chest sending a shiver down his spine. The soft light from the alien sky highlighted her flawless blue skin which shimmered faintly. There was strength and grace in her every movement but also a tenderness he hadn't expected. Their gazes locked, her touch both gentle and insistent as she traced a path down his body. The air between them was charged, the intensity building with each breath. Instinctively Roy's hands found her waist, her warmth a contrast to the cool night air. As they moved closer, the boundary between human and alien seemed to dissolve. Era's breath was hot against his neck, her movements slow, deliberate, savoring the moment. Her hands guided him with a silent authority, both commanding and inviting. Roy felt a sense of trust, not of surrender but connection. Their breaths synchronized as they moved in perfect rhythm, every touch and glance carrying meaning. There was no rush, just a deep unspoken understanding as the world outside faded away. They were left with the quiet intimacy of the moment. In the aftermath, as they lay together in silence, the connection between them said more than words ever could. Dawn broke, painting the alien sky in shades of lavender and gold. Roy blinked awake, momentarily disoriented. The events of the previous day came rushing back as he felt a warm body pressed against his side. Era stirred, her silver eyes meeting his. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence thick with unspoken emotions. Roy finally managed, so, that happened. A smile played at Era's lips. Indeed, it did. Any regrets, Skyman? Not a single one, he replied honestly. Though, I'm a little worried about the consequences. Won't the council be upset? Era's expression grew serious. They may be. But I am chief, and I make my own choices. She traced a finger along his jaw, her eyes filled with a fierce protectiveness. And you, Roy Clark, are a choice I do not regret. A commotion outside interrupted them. Voices, loud and agitated, echoed through the village. Era cursed under her breath, leaping from the bed and dressing with inhuman speed. Stay here, she ordered, her voice urgent. I will handle this. Roy pulled on his own clothes as Era slipped out through the window. He could see a gathering crowd with Althena at its center. The head of the council's face was thunderous as she confronted Era. You were ordered to guard him, not bed him. Althena's voice carried clearly through the morning air. Era stood her ground, her chin lifted in defiance. I did guard him. Very thoroughly. A ripple of laughter and shocked gasps ran through the crowd. Roy winced. So much for discretion. This is no laughing matter, Althena snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. We know nothing about this man or his intentions. Your actions could have put our entire tribe at risk. Or they could be our salvation, Era countered, her voice ringing with conviction. We've discussed this for centuries, Althena. Our people are dying out. The cloning process grows more unstable with each generation. If Roy can father children. That's a big if, another voice cut in. A lithe woman with intricate tattoos pushed through the crowd, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. We don't even know if he's compatible with our biology. An excellent point, Kara, Althena nodded, her expression grim. Which is why we needed to study him carefully before any rash actions. Roy decided it was time to make an appearance. He stepped out of the treehouse, all eyes immediately locking onto him. Look, he said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. I understand. I'm a bit of an unknown here. But I promise, I mean you no harm. I'm just a guy who crash-landed on your planet and is trying to figure things out, same as you. Althena's eyes narrowed, her gaze unwavering. Pretty words, but actions speak louder. You took advantage of our chief's curiosity. With all due respect, Roy replied, unable to keep a hint of indignation from his voice, I didn't take advantage of anyone. Era made her own choice, as she said. A murmur ran through the crowd. Era shot him a grateful look. Be that as it may, Althena pressed on, we cannot simply trust you based on one night's indiscretion. You will submit to our tests and questioning. We must determine if you truly pose no threat to our people. Roy nodded, his jaw set with determination. That's fair. I'll cooperate fully. But I have questions of my own, if you don't mind. Starting with, how you all speak English. A young woman with bright, inquisitive eyes pushed forward, her face lighting up with enthusiasm. Oh, I can answer that. I'm NEA, by the way, she beamed at Roy. We have translation implants. They allow us to understand and speak most known languages. Fascinating, Roy breathed, genuinely impressed. Your technology is incredible. The way your buildings blend with nature, these implants, it's leagues beyond anything we have on Earth. NEA's eyes lit up. Really? Oh, I have so many questions about your world. Perhaps while Althena runs her tests, you could tell me more. Althena cleared her throat loudly, her gaze fixed on NEA. That's quite enough, NEA. Roy will be thoroughly questioned, but under controlled circumstances. She gestured to two guards standing nearby. Take him to the examination chamber. Era, a word. As the guards led Roy away, he caught snippets of the heated discussion behind him, completely irresponsible. Changes everything. Couldn't help myself. Roy squared his shoulders, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. Whatever tests they had planned, he'd face them head-on. He was a stranger in a strange land, but something told him his fate was now inexorably tied to these fascinating, blue-skinned women. The guards brought Roy to a sleek structure that seemed to pulse with energy. Inside, various unfamiliar devices lined the walls, their purpose unknown and slightly intimidating. Althena entered, followed by a reluctant-looking Era. We will begin with a full biological scan, Althena announced, her voice cold and clinical. Please disrobe and step onto the platform. Roy hesitated. Is that really necessary? Era smirked, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Shy now, Skyman. He shot her a look, trying to suppress a smile. I just prefer to know what I'm getting into. The scan is harmless, Althena assured him, her tone impatient. It will give us a complete picture of your physiology and genetic makeup. Roy sighed and began to undress, his movements self-conscious. At least buy me dinner first, he muttered as he stepped onto the platform. A soft blue light enveloped him, tingling slightly but, true to Althena's word, causing no discomfort. After a few moments, the light faded. Althena studied a holographic display, her eyebrows rising in surprise. Fascinating. Your DNA structure is remarkably similar to our own, despite the obvious physical differences. Is that good news? Roy asked, reaching for his clothes. It means compatibility is possible, Era said, a note of triumph in her voice. Althena shot her a quelling look. It means further study is warranted. Now, Roy, we have many questions about your people, your technology, and how you came to be here. What followed was an hour of intense questioning. Roy did his best to answer honestly, explaining Earth's level of technological development, their fledgling interstellar exploration program, and the malfunction that led to his crash landing. As the interrogation wore on, he found himself growing increasingly curious about the Azura in return. Their society, built entirely of women over centuries, was unlike anything he could have imagined. So, you've really had no contact with the outside galaxy in all this time? he asked during a lull. NEA, who had been allowed to observe, piped up eagerly, her eyes shining with curiosity. We've picked up transmissions and signals, but never responded. Our ancestors feared drawing attention to ourselves while we were vulnerable. NEA, Althena warned, her voice sharp. We are questioning him, not the other way around. Oh, come on, Roy said, his voice laced with a playful challenge. A cultural exchange could benefit both of us. I'm happy to keep answering your questions, but I'd like to learn more too. Era nodded, her expression thoughtful. He has a point, Althena. If we're considering integrating him into our society, he needs to understand us as well. Althena's lips thinned, but she relented. Very well. A short recess, then. NEA, you may show Roy around the village, but, she added sternly, no sensitive areas. And Era, you will accompany them. As they left the examination chamber, Roy stretched, working out the kinks from hours of sitting. So, he said casually to Era, a grin spreading across his face, integrated into your society, huh? She raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in her eyes. It's one possibility under consideration. Unless you're eager to leave. Roy glanced around at the lush alien landscape and the beautiful women surrounding him. You know, he said with a grin, I think I could get used to this place. As the alien suns climbed higher in the lavender sky, Roy found himself knee-deep in rich, purple soil, sweat beading on his brow as he worked alongside a group of azure women, implementing his redesigned irrigation system. Careful with that valve, Ira, he called out to a blue-skinned beauty struggling with a particularly stubborn connector. You don't want to flood the entire field. Ira grunted with effort, her muscles straining. Easy for you to say, Skyman. You Earthlings must have some kind of magic touch. Roy chuckled, wading over to help her. No magic, just a little engineering know-how. Let me show you. As he worked alongside the azure women, Roy felt a sense of belonging he hadn't expected. Despite the initial suspicion and the vast cultural differences, he found them to be intelligent, resourceful, and fiercely independent. He was learning their ways, and they, in turn, were learning from him. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since his crash landing, Roy felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps. Struggling with a particularly stubborn connector. You don't want to flood the entire field. Ira grunted with effort, her muscles straining. Easy for you to say, Skyman. You Earthlings must have some kind of magic touch. Roy chuckled, wading over to help her. No magic, just a little engineering know-how. Let me show you. As he worked alongside the azure women, Roy felt a sense of belonging he hadn't expected. Despite the initial suspicion and the vast cultural differences, he found them to be intelligent, resourceful, and fiercely independent. He was learning their ways, and they, in turn, were learning from him. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since his crash landing, Roy felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could build a new life here, among the azure of Nova. That evening, after a long day of labor under the twin suns, Roy found himself in a quiet corner of the village, sketching designs in the dirt with a piece of charcoal. NEA, ever curious, sat beside him, her bright eyes alight with fascination. What are you drawing, Roy? She asked, tilting her head. Just some ideas for improving the village's energy grid, he explained, pointing to the diagram. Your bioluminescent plants are amazing, but they could be even more efficient if we could harness their energy more effectively. NEA gasped. You could do that? Our energy sources have been dwindling for generations. If you could help us. It's just an idea, Roy cautioned, but I think it's worth exploring. I'd need some materials and access to your data networks, though. NEA's face lit up. I can help with that. I have access to the archives. We can study the ancient texts together. Oh, this is so exciting. As NEA rambled on about the possibilities, Roy couldn't help but smile. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and he found himself drawn to her genuine curiosity and eagerness to learn. But he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. He noticed Kara, the woman who had challenged his presence at the council meeting, watching them from a distance, her expression dark and disapproving. Later that night, as Roy lay in his treehouse, he heard a soft knock at the door. It was Era. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice low. "Of course," Roy replied, sitting up. Era entered, her face troubled. "I need to talk to you," she said, pacing the room. "Things are complicated." "Tell me about it," Roy said, leaning back against the wall. "I can feel the tension in the air. It's like half the village wants to kiss me, and the other half wants to kill me." Era sighed. "Kara and her followers are spreading rumors. They say you're a spy, that you're here to exploit our resources and steal our technology. They want me to banish you." Roy's jaw tightened. "And what do you think?" Era stopped pacing and looked him in the eye. "I don't believe them. But I can't ignore their concerns. My first duty is to protect my people." "So, what are you going to do?" Roy asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I don't know," Era admitted, her voice laced with uncertainty. "I need to find a way to prove your intentions are pure. I need to show them that you can help us, not hurt us." "Maybe I can help you with that," Roy said, an idea forming in his mind. "What if I could find a way to restore your ability to reproduce naturally? What if I could break the curse?" Era's eyes widened, a mixture of hope and disbelief in her gaze. "Do you think that's possible?" "I don't know," Roy admitted, "but it's worth a shot, right? I could study your ancient texts, your genetic data. Maybe I could find a clue, a loophole in the curse." Era stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "That would be incredible," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "But it would also be incredibly dangerous. If Kara and her followers thought you were close to breaking the curse, they might do anything to stop you." "Then we'll just have to be careful," Roy said, a determined glint in his eyes. "We'll work in secret, with only those we trust. NEA can help us with the research. And you can protect us from Kara and her goons." Era nodded slowly, her expression hardening with resolve. "All right," she said, "we'll do it. But you need to understand, Roy, if this goes wrong, it could tear our tribe apart." "I understand," Roy replied, his voice firm. "But I'm willing to take the risk." "Are you?" Era met his gaze, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. "I am," she said. "For the sake of my people, I'm willing to do anything." And so, an uneasy alliance was formed. Roy, Era, and NEA embarked on a secret mission to unravel the mysteries of the Azura's past and find a way to restore their future. They spent hours poring over ancient texts, studying genetic data, and conducting clandestine experiments in a hidden laboratory beneath the village. As they delved deeper into their research, they began to uncover unsettling truths about the Azura's history. The curse that had plagued them for centuries was not simply a random act of fate, but the result of a deliberate act of sabotage by a rival tribe. A tribe that had sought to destroy the Azura and claim their planet for themselves. "This changes everything," NEA exclaimed, her eyes wide with shock. "The curse wasn't just a curse. It was an act of war. And it means there might be a way to reverse it," Roy added, his voice filled with excitement. "If we can find the original source of the sabotage, we can find a way to neutralize it." But their discovery came at a price. Kara and her followers were growing increasingly suspicious of their activities. They had noticed Roy, Era, and NEA spending long hours together in secret, and they were convinced that something was afoot. One night, as Roy and NEA were leaving the hidden laboratory, they were ambushed by Kara and a group of her followers. "What are you two up to?" Kara demanded, her voice dripping with suspicion. "What secrets are you hiding from us?" "We're just working on some new energy technologies," NEA stammered, trying to deflect Kara's questions. "Don't lie to me," Kara snapped, grabbing NEA by the arm. "I know you're up to something. And I'm going to find out what it is." Roy stepped forward, placing himself between Kara and NEA. "Leave her alone, Kara," he said, his voice low and threatening. Kara glared at him, her eyes filled with hatred. "You think you can protect her, Skyman? You think you can come here and disrupt our way of life and get away with it? You're wrong. I'm going to expose you for what you are, a liar, a thief, and a danger to our people." Before Roy could respond, Kara lunged at him, her hand raised to strike. But before her hand could connect, Era appeared, her spear flashing in the moonlight. "Stand down, Kara," Era commanded, her voice ringing with authority. "You will not harm him." Kara hesitated, her eyes darting between Era and Roy. "You're protecting him?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "Even after everything he's done?" "He has done nothing wrong," Era replied, her voice firm. "He is trying to help us. And I will not allow you to interfere." Kara stared at Era for a long moment, her face contorted with anger and resentment. "Fine," she spat, "but don't say I didn't warn you. He will betray you. He will betray us all." With that, Kara and her followers turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Roy, Era, and NEA alone in the night. "Are you all right?" Era asked, turning to Roy, her expression filled with concern. "I'm fine," Roy replied, "but I think it's time we stepped up our security. Kara is not going to give up easily." Era nodded grimly. "You're right. We need to be prepared for anything." As they returned to the village, Roy couldn't shake off the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Kara was cunning and ruthless, and she would stop at nothing to achieve her goals. He knew that they were in a dangerous game, and the stakes were higher than ever before. The future of the Azura tribe, and perhaps his own life, hung in the balance. And as the twin suns rose on the horizon, casting their long shadows across the alien landscape, Roy knew that the time for reckoning was fast approaching. The echoes of the past were growing louder, and the choices they made in the coming days would determine the fate of Nova, forever. Part 3, Whispers of Rebellion, Seeds of Hope. The confrontation with Kara had left a palpable tension hanging over the village. The Azura, usually so open and harmonious, now cast wary glances at Roy and his companions. Whispers followed them through the market, and even the children seemed less eager to approach him with curious questions. "They're scared," NEA observed, her voice barely audible as she and Roy walked back from gathering supplies. "Kara has a way of making people doubt." Roy sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not just her. They're scared of the possibility that I might actually change things. Some of them are comfortable with the way things are, even if it means a slow decline. But that's foolish." NEA protested, her eyes flashing. "Don't they see that we're on the brink of extinction? That without you, we have no future." "Logic doesn't always win, NEA," Roy said gently. "Fear is a powerful motivator. And Kara is using it to her advantage." Back in the hidden laboratory, Era was waiting, her face etched with worry. "I've heard rumors," she said, her voice low. "Kara is planning something. I don't know what it is, but it can't be good." "We need to be proactive," Roy said, pacing the room. "We can't just sit here and wait for her to strike. We need to find out what she's planning and stop her before it's too late." "But how?" NEA asked, her voice filled with anxiety. "We don't have any spies within her group." "Maybe we don't need spies," Roy said, a gleam in his eyes. "Maybe we just need to listen." He explained his plan, using the Azura's advanced communication technology to intercept Kara's messages and eavesdrop on her conversations. It was a risky move, but they were running out of options. With NEA's help, they managed to tap into Kara's communication channels. What they heard was chilling. Kara was gathering support from other villages, spreading lies about Roy and his intentions. She was planning a full-scale rebellion, with the goal of overthrowing Era and banishing Roy from Nova. "She's going to start a war," Era said, her voice trembling with anger and betrayal. "She's willing to destroy our entire tribe to get rid of you." "We can't let that happen," Roy said, his jaw set with determination. "We need to act fast. We need to convince the other villages that Kara is lying, that I'm here to help, not to harm." But convincing the other villages would be a difficult task. They were isolated and suspicious of outsiders, and Kara's lies had already taken root. Roy knew that he needed to do something drastic to win their trust. He came up with a plan. He would travel to the other villages himself, unarmed and unprotected, and speak to the people directly. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was the only way to counter Kara's propaganda and show the other villages that he was sincere. Era was vehemently opposed to the idea. "It's too risky," she argued. "Kara will kill you the moment you set foot outside the village." "I have to try," Roy said, his voice firm. "If I stay here, Kara will win. She'll turn the entire tribe against us, and we'll never have a chance to find a cure." After much arguing, Era reluctantly agreed to let him go, but only if she and NEA accompanied him. She refused to let him face the danger alone. The journey to the other villages was fraught with peril. Kara's followers ambushed them several times, but Era's skill as a warrior and NEA's knowledge of the terrain allowed them to escape unscathed. When they finally reached the first village, they were met with hostility and suspicion. The villagers had heard Kara's lies, and they were convinced that Roy was a dangerous invader. But Roy refused to be deterred. He spoke to the villagers with passion and sincerity, telling them about his goals, his hopes, and his commitment to helping the Azra. He showed them the research he and NEA had been conducting, the progress they had made in understanding the curse. Slowly but surely, the villagers began to listen. They saw the truth in Roy's eyes, the genuine desire to help them. They realized that Kara had been lying, that she was willing to sacrifice the entire tribe for her own selfish ambitions. One by one, the other villages began to turn against Kara. They pledged their support to Era and Roy, promising to help them in their fight against the rebellion. When Kara learned that her plans had been foiled, she flew into a rage. She vowed to destroy Roy and his allies, no matter the cost. She gathered her remaining followers and launched a surprise attack on Era's village. The battle was fierce and bloody, with both sides suffering heavy losses. Roy fought alongside Era, his courage and skill inspiring the Azra warriors. He used his knowledge of Earth technology to create makeshift weapons and defenses, turning the tide of the battle in their favor. In the end, Kara's forces were defeated. Kara herself was captured, her rebellion crushed. With Kara out of the way, the Azra tribe began to heal. The other villages rallied around Era, pledging their loyalty and support. Roy was hailed as a hero, the savior of the Azra. But Roy knew that their work was far from over. The curse still lingered, and the threat of extinction loomed large. He and NEA continued their research, driven by a burning desire to find a cure. One day, as they were studying an ancient map, they stumbled upon a clue, a hidden location deep within the Nova jungle, a place where the Azra's ancestors had once practiced forbidden magic. Could this be the key to breaking the curse? Could this hidden location hold the secrets they had been searching for? Roy and his companions prepared for a dangerous journey into the unknown, determined to unravel the mysteries of the past and secure a future for the Azra. They knew that the path ahead would be fraught with peril, but they were willing to face any challenge, to risk everything, for the sake of their people. The seeds of hope had been sown, and they were determined to nurture them, to cultivate a new dawn for Nova, a dawn free from the shadows of the past. Part 4, The Labyrinth of Shadows and Lost Memories. The ancient map, brittle and faded with time, depicted a region of Nova shrouded in mist and legend. The area, known as the Whispering Labyrinth, was said to be a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where the echoes of the past resonated with unnerving clarity. It was also rumored to be the site of the Azura's darkest secrets, a place they had long forbidden from entering. "Are you sure about this, Roy?" Era asked, her voice laced with concern as they prepared for the journey. "The labyrinth is a dangerous place. Even the bravest warriors fear to tread there." "I know," Roy replied, his expression grim. "But we're running out of options. The map clearly indicates that the source of the curse is located somewhere within the labyrinth. If we want to break it, we have to go there." NEA, who had been meticulously studying the map, nodded in agreement. "The symbols and markings align with ancient texts describing forbidden magic," she said. "It's possible that our ancestors attempted to manipulate the life force of Nova, and in doing so, unleash the curse upon themselves. Then we need to undo what they did," Roy said, his jaw set with determination. "We need to confront the past and reclaim our future." The journey to the Whispering Labyrinth was arduous and treacherous. The landscape grew increasingly hostile, with twisted vegetation, treacherous ravines, and eerie silence. The air was thick with a palpable sense of dread, as if the very planet was warning them to turn back. As they ventured deeper into the labyrinth, they began to experience strange phenomena. Illusions flickered at the edge of their vision, whispering voices echoed in their minds, and the shadows seemed to dance and writhe with a life of their own. "This place is messing with our heads," Roy muttered, rubbing his temples. "I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality." "The labyrinth is designed to test our minds," NEA explained. "It feeds on our fears and doubts, trying to break our spirits." Era, ever vigilant, scanned the surroundings, her spear at the ready. "We need to stay focused," she said. "We can't let our emotions cloud our judgment. The labyrinth wants us to fail, but we won't give it the satisfaction." As they pressed on, they stumbled upon ancient ruins, crumbling temples and forgotten altars, remnants of a civilization that had once thrived in the labyrinth. The ruins were covered in strange symbols and glyphs, which NEA recognized as a form of ancient Azure writing. "These texts tell of a time when our ancestors possessed incredible magical powers," NEA said, translating the glyphs. "They could manipulate the elements, heal the sick, and even control the forces of life and death. But they also abused their powers," Roy added, reading a different set of glyphs. "They became arrogant and corrupt, using their magic for selfish gain. That's why they were banished to the labyrinth, to atone for their sins. And it seems that their sins are still haunting us today," Era said grimly. As they continued to explore the ruins, they discovered a hidden chamber, a vast underground cavern filled with glowing crystals and pulsating energy. In the center of the chamber stood a massive altar, stained with blood and covered in intricate carvings. "This is it," NEA whispered, her voice trembling with awe and fear. "This is the source of the curse." As they approached the altar, they were confronted by a spectral figure, a ghostly apparition of an ancient Azure sorceress. The sorceress's eyes glowed with malevolent energy, and her voice echoed with the weight of centuries. "You have trespassed upon sacred ground," the sorceress hissed. "You seek to undo what is meant to be. But you will fail. The curse cannot be broken." "We won't let you stop us," Roy said, his voice firm. "We know what you did. You abused your power and unleashed this curse upon our people. But we're here to set things right. You cannot comprehend the forces you are dealing with," the sorceress sneered. "The curse is more powerful than you can imagine. It will consume you, just as it consumed your ancestors." The sorceress unleashed a wave of energy, blasting Roy and his companions off their feet. They landed hard on the cavern floor, struggling to regain their composure. "We need to find a way to destroy that altar," Era said, gritting her teeth. "That's the source of her power." "But how?" NEA asked, her voice filled with despair. "It's protected by some kind of magical shield." Roy scanned the chamber, searching for a weakness in the sorceress's defenses. He noticed that the glowing crystals were connected to the altar by a series of energy conduits. "I have an idea," Roy said, his eyes lighting up. "If we can disrupt the flow of energy from the crystals to the altar, we might be able to weaken the shield." He instructed NEA to use her knowledge of ancient magic to create a counterspell, a way to disrupt the energy conduits. While NEA worked on the spell, Roy and Aerith